A rider goes down near Badwater Basin. July 15th, 2023, the air reads 128 degrees. The medevac helicopter never launches because hot air is too thin to hold a rotor. The National Park Service says helicopters cannot generally fly safely above 120 degrees. This is Death Valley, 3.4 million acres, a floor 282 feet below the sea, the driest desert in North America. The first answer is the heat. But the heat kills no one directly. It removes options. So why does rescue get further away exactly when the heat peaks? A family of 4 vanished here. They were not found for 13 years. And here's the strange part, the part that should stop you before we go any further. This valley is named for a crossing that almost everyone survived. Nobody named it for the summer. They named it for a winter. And for a group of people who walked in expecting a shortcut and walked out having lost, out of dozens, a single man. Hold on to that contradiction. It is the first sign that the thing killing people out here is not the number on the thermometer. Start with the shape of the place, because the shape is the whole story. Death Valley is not a hotspot on a map. It is a box. 4 mountain ranges stand between the Pacific Ocean and this basin, and they work like a series of walls. Air coming off the ocean carries moisture. It hits the Sierra Nevada first and is forced up, and rising air cools, and cooling air drops its water as rain and snow on the western slope. Air cools as it rises for a plain reason. The higher it goes, the less pressure squeezes it, and a gas that expands cools down. Cold air cannot hold as much water vapor as warm air, so the moisture condenses and falls out of the sky. Every range does this to the air again, and every range keeps a little more of the water. What crosses the crest is already wrung out. Then it hits the Argus Range and loses more. Then the Panamints, then the Amargosa. By the time that air slides down into the valley floor, it has been squeezed dry 4 separate times. The basin gets about 2 inches of rain in a year, some years essentially none. 2 inches. Put that in a body's terms. A single afternoon thunderstorm in a wet climate can drop more water than this basin sees in 12 months. And here that little arrives, spread across the whole year, most of it evaporating before it can pool. There is almost nothing to drink that falls from the sky, and almost nothing green growing to tell you where water might be hiding underground. Now look up from the lowest point. Stand at Badwater 282 feet below sea level, and directly west of you rises Telescope Peak, 11,049 feet. That summit is 2 vertical miles above your head, and it is only about 15 miles away in a straight line. In winter, it holds snow while you stand roasting in the basin. You can, on a January day, be photographed in a t-shirt at the lowest point in North America with a snow-capped peak filling the frame behind you. 2 miles of air separate the two straight up, and that climb does something the flat 15 miles cannot. Because in this country, up is the only direction that reliably means relief. Hold that thought. It comes back at the very end when a life depends on it. That is not scenery. That is the machine. Those walls that make the snow are the same walls that trap the heat. This is not a hot place that happens to be enclosed. It is enclosed, and that is why it is hot. Here is how the trap actually cooks. The valley floor is dark, bare rock and salt and gravel, almost no vegetation, almost never a cloud, almost no shade anywhere. Sunlight hits that dark ground, and the ground drinks it. On July 15, 1972, at Furnace Creek, the ground surface was measured at 201 degrees Fahrenheit. The air that same day was 128. Think about that gap. The ground was hot enough to cook an egg past done, and the air above it was being heated from below like a pan on a burner. Remember that surface number when we reached the man who lost his shoes. Air temperature is what the thermometer shows and what the news reports. The ground is a different thing entirely, and the ground is what your body actually touches. That heated air rises. but it cannot escape, because those four ranges wall it in. It reaches the mountainsides, cannot get over them, and sinks back down. And sinking air compresses, and compressed air heats up again. So the valley does not just receive heat, it recycles it. The same air is warmed, lifted, trapped, dropped, squeezed, and warmed again, day after day, with nowhere to go. And there is a twist in that recycling most people miss, one that will matter enormously when we get to the helicopters. When air sinks, it does not just get trapped, it gets pressurized by the weight of all the air above it, and compressing a gas heats it. The same reason a bicycle pump warms in your hand as you work it. Air that spilled off the cool Panamint Heights arrives at the basin floor several degrees hotter than it left, purely from the fall. So the walls do the job twice. They wring the rain out of the air on the way in, and they superheat the air on the way down. Nothing here is exotic. It is a pump, and the valley is the cylinder. So the obvious question, the one anybody standing here 2,000 years ago would have asked, if this place manufactures its own heat, how did anyone live in it? Because people did. And the answer is not that they were tougher than us. The Timbisha Shoshone lived in and around this valley for centuries, and they did not survive it by enduring it. They survived it by refusing to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Their occupation followed the springs and followed the calendar. In winter, they lived on the valley floor, where it was mild and water could be found. As the heat came on, they moved up into the Panamint Highlands, thousands of feet above the basin, where the air was cooler, and there was game, and there were pine nuts. Their mesquite harvest was timed to elevation, following the ripening up the slope. The mesquite pods did not ripen everywhere at once. They came ready later the higher you climbed, so a family moving uphill through the season could follow the harvest itself, eating at each elevation as it opened and never sitting still long enough for the heat to catch them on the floor. The entire way of life was built around leaving on schedule. That is the first thing this place teaches, and almost nobody learns it in time. Survival here was never a matter of toughness. It was a matter of not being caught. The people who died out here, again and again across 2 centuries, were almost always people who arrived on the wrong schedule, running on a calendar set somewhere else, by someone else, for reasons that had nothing to do with the valley. Which brings us to the people the valley is named for, and to the winter of 1849. They were part of the gold rush, a group of families and wagons trying to reach the California gold fields, and they had been sold a shortcut. On paper, it saved weeks. The plan was to cut southwest across this country and drop down into the Central Valley of California, where the gold was. Their whole mental model rested on one belief, that the mountains ahead of them were the last mountains, the Sierra Nevada, and that just beyond that final ridge, the land would open into Green Valley and rescue. That belief is what killed the ones it killed, and it is worth understanding exactly why, because it is the same mistake people make here in every era. They came down into the valley in December of 1849, not the killing heat of July, the cold. Their oxen were failing. There was no food to speak of. There were children in the group, and the exit they were counting on, the pass west through the mountains, did not exist the way they thought. What they were looking at was not the Sierra with the Central Valley behind it. It was the Panamint Range, a wall, and behind that wall more desert, and behind that more mountains still. They had walked into a room, and the door they were sure of was a painting of a door. Understand what that is as a survival problem, because it is not the same as being lost. Lost, you can retrace your steps. These people knew roughly where they were. Their problem was that the direction they had to go, west toward the gold fields, was blocked by a range, Boboasgang with no wagon pass, and the direction they had come from was hundreds of miles of the same desert that had already half-killed the oxen. Both doors were shut. That is exit geometry, and it is the thing that actually kills in this valley, in 1849 and in every year since. When the oxen gave out and it became clear no wagon was crossing that wall, two of the younger men, William Lewis Manley and John Rogers, went ahead on foot to find help and bring it back. This was not a short walk. They covered close to 300 miles on foot across desert and range, Rafin Warszachentorsbrau, to reach a ranch near Mission San Fernando in the settled part of California. And then, this is the part that matters, they turned around and came back. 26 days after they left, they walked back into that valley, leading 3 horses and a one-eyed mule, carrying food to a group of people most rescuers would have written off as dead. The horses did not all survive the return crossing. The people, almost all of them, did. Out of that entire stranded party, exactly 1 man is recorded as having died inside the valley. Captain Culverwell. And he died in the winter of exhaustion and exposure, not of heat. As they finally climbed out over the western mountains and looked back down at the basin that had nearly held them forever, one of the group is said to have spoken the words that named it, Death Valley, a name given in the cool season by survivors for a place that had killed almost none of them. Sit with that reversal, because it rewrites the whole thing. The valley earned its terrifying name during a near miss in winter. The thing that trapped the Bennett Arcand party was not temperature. It was geometry. The shape of the exits, the wall where they expected a pass, the distance to help. They were not defeated by heat. They were defeated by a map in their heads that did not match the ground under their feet. And Manley and Rogers proved that the valley could be beaten, that people could walk out and even walk back in, if they understood the real problem. The heat was not yet the enemy. The enemy was believing you knew the way out. So why would anyone come back to a place like this on purpose? Money. Specifically, minerals. The valley had nothing anyone wanted except what was buried under it. And what was under it was worth enough to build and staff an outpost inside a furnace. And that pull is what set up the number that made Death Valley a legend. A number that is probably wrong. By the 1880s, borax and silver were being pulled out of this valley, and where there is ore, there are people. And where there are people, someone eventually keeps records. The Coleman Borax Company built a ranch on the valley floor in 1883 called Greenland Ranch, near what is now Furnace Creek. In 1911, the U.S. Weather Bureau opened a station there. And on July 10, 1913, the observer at that station, a man named Oscar Denton, recorded an air temperature of 134 degrees Fahrenheit. 134. To this day, the World Meteorological Organization still lists that reading as the hottest air temperature ever reliably measured on the surface of the Earth. Except a lot of people who study this for a living do not believe it. In 2016, 2 climate researchers, Reed and Burt, went back and reconstructed the weather across all the surrounding stations for those days in July 1913, what the temperatures were doing across the whole region, what was physically consistent with the air masses present, and they concluded that a reading of 134 at Greenland Ranch was, in their words, essentially not possible from a meteorological perspective. It did not fit anything else happening around it. Their best explanation was not fraud and not some freak microclimate. It was simpler and more human. Observer error. A misread instrument, a mistaken entry, on a station run by hand at a mining outpost. The record has never been officially overturned. The WMO has not ruled. So it sits there, disputed but standing. The most famous temperature in the world. And quite possibly a mistake. And here is the reversal that should change how you hear every heat record from now on. The number that built the entire legend of this place is the one we trust least. The temperatures we can actually stand behind are the modern, well-instrumented ones. 129.2 degrees on July 7, 2024, verified by proper equipment. The difference between 1913 and 2024 is the instrument. A single hand-read thermometer at a remote mining ranch can be wrong by degrees and stay wrong forever, because there is no way to go back and check it a century later. A modern station is calibrated, automated, and surrounded by other stations that would flag it the moment it drifted. The old record is fragile for the same reason the new ones are solid. July 2023 was the hottest month ever recorded anywhere on Earth by average, a 24-hour average temperature of 108.5 degrees, meaning even in the dead of night it barely let go. Sit with that average for a second. An average of 108.5 across a whole day means the heat never clocks out when the sun goes down. In most hot places, the night is the reprieve, the window when a body sheds the day's load and a stranded person buys back a few hours. Here, through that July, the night barely came down into the low hundreds. There was no reprieve to wait for. The trap ran 24 hours a day. Those are the dangerous numbers. Not because they are higher, they are lower than 134, but because they are real, and a real 120 plus does something specific and merciless to a human body. Here is what it does, and it is worth understanding because it explains almost every death that follows. Your body cools itself by sweating. Sweat evaporates off your skin and carries heat away with it. That system works beautifully, up to a point. Once the combination of heat and load, what forecasters call the heat index, climbs past about 99 degrees, the surrounding air essentially stops helping you. Above your own body temperature, the air is no longer a place to dump heat into. It is pushing heat back at you. In Death Valley's dry blast furnace air, your sweat evaporates so fast you never see it. Your skin can look bone dry while you are pouring out water. You do not feel drenched. You feel fine, right up until you are not. In humid heat, your skin stays wet, and you can watch yourself sweat. And the sight of it is a warning your brain understands. Here, that warning is deleted. The desert is so starved for moisture that it strips the sweat off you the instant it forms, which feels like a cool breeze and is in fact the mechanism of your dehydration running flat out. And thirst is a liar out here. It lags far behind your actual water loss, so by the time you feel really thirsty, you are already deep in a hole you cannot climb out of by drinking. Your core temperature climbs, and the first thing high core temperature attacks is judgment. Before your legs give out, your decision-making gives out, you get confused, you make a bad call. Often the worst call available, you decide to walk. Now put that failing body into 3.4 million acres with no cell signal, no shade, and a car you can no longer clearly remember the direction of. 3.4 million acres is not a number a person can feel, so make it concrete. It is larger than the state of Connecticut, most of it with no paved road, no water, no shade taller than a creosote bush, and no cell tower to carry a call for help. A person who walks a straight line for 1 hour in the wrong direction here has not made a small mistake. They have put themselves beyond the reach of anyone who might be looking. In country where the searchers themselves, as we are about to see, guess wrong about which way you went, that is not a heat problem anymore. That is the trap closing. And in the summer of 1996, it closed on 4 people from Dresden. And it did it so completely that it took 13 years and one obsessed stranger to even find out where they went. They are remembered now as the Death Valley Germans. Egbert Rimkus, 34. His son Georg Weber, 11. Rimkus's girlfriend Cornelia Meyer, 27. And her son Max Meyer, 4 years old. They flew into Los Angeles, arrived on the 8th of July, 1996, and rented a green Plymouth Voyager minivan. An ordinary family van built for suburban roads. Then they drove into the largest national park in the lower 48 states and pointed that van at country that eats vehicles. We know a little about their intentions because of a note. At Warm Springs Camp, deep in the backcountry, they left a log entry about heading over the pass. The pass they meant was almost certainly Mangle Pass, a rough four-wheel drive route through the Panamints, the kind of track that swallows the underside of a minivan and does not let go. That van was never going over Mangle Pass. Somewhere in that country, it stopped being a vehicle and started being a landmark they had to walk away from. That is the point of no return this valley specializes in. The moment the machine that carried you in stops being transport and becomes a fixed object you have to abandon on foot. A minivan on that kind of track depends on a cooling system, on tires, on a ground clearance built for pavement, and any one of them failing ends the drive right there. The exact ages of the four are reported differently in different accounts, and small facts like that blur with time. But the mechanism does not blur. 4 people, one of them a 4-year-old boy, stepped away from the last cool, shaded, water-carrying object they had in July, miles into the backcountry, and started walking. The search that followed is the reversal here. And it is not a story about people not trying hard enough. Crews looked. The van itself was not located until October 21, 1996, months after they had gone in. The official search was called off 5 days later, on October 26th. And the searchers made a reasonable assumption, the kind of assumption that gets made when you have to cover an area larger than some states with limited people and time. They decided the family would not have gone south, down into Wingate Wash, toward the boundary of the China Lake Military Range. It was the wrong assumption, it was reasonable, and it was wrong. And the two facts do not cancel each other out. Years later, a man named Tom Mahood, an engineer and amateur searcher who could not let the case go, did something the official effort had not done. He put himself in the position of 4 people whose van had failed, whose water was gone, whose judgment was already cooking, and he asked not where a rational person would go, but where that terrain would funnel a desperate one. He concluded they had gone exactly where officials had refused to search. South, down into the drainage, toward Wingate Wash. In 2009, Mahood and a fellow searcher, Les Walker, went there. On November 12, 2009, they found human remains, along with personal effects, about 8 miles from where the van had been abandoned, and only about 4 miles from the China Lake boundary fence. 4 miles from a fence line, from something built by people. 8 miles from the van, 4 from the fence. Those are walking distances. The kind of gap a healthy person closes in a couple of hours on a cool morning without thinking about it. That is the specific cruelty of the geometry here. The scale that defeats you is not always vast. Sometimes it is 4 miles you cannot cross because the heat took your water, then your judgment, then your legs, in that exact order, before you ever came within sight of the fence. The identifications of the children were never confirmed, and the exact route those 4 walked is a probable reconstruction, not a certainty. That has to be said plainly, but the shape of it is clear enough, and the lesson is brutal. The search did not fail for lack of effort. It failed on a map assumption. The professionals guessing where the valley sends people guessed wrong. In the same category of error, the Bennett Arcand Party made in 1849. Even the rescuers misjudged the geometry. That is how good this trap is. It fools the people whose job is not to be fooled. If the valley can compress a family's options over weeks, it can also compress a single expert's options into a few seconds. And on the morning of July 31, 2019, it did, to one of the most capable pilots in the United States Navy. There is a place in the park called Rainbow Canyon, a low-level flight corridor where military jets train, threading between canyon walls at high speed and low altitude. It is legal, it is planned for, and to the tourists who gather on the rim to watch, it is a show. On that morning at about 9:50, an FA-18E Super Hornet from Strike Fighter Squadron 151 came through the canyon. At the controls was Lieutenant Charles Walker, described in his own squadron as its most experienced, low-level pilot. Experience was not the missing ingredient. The jet struck the canyon wall. Rangers found scattered debris across the terrain, and 7 visitors on the ground were hurt, cut, and struck by fragments, though all 7 had injuries described as non-life-threatening. The Navy investigated. Their central finding was blunt. The aircraft was too fast and too low with respect to the surrounding terrain. In that kind of flying, the ground does not give you time back. At those speeds between those walls, the margin between a perfect pass and a wall is measured in a heartbeat, and terrain eats reaction time. A jet moving that fast covers several hundred feet in a single second. A correction that would be routine with a mile of open air becomes impossible when the wall is already inside that 1 second of travel. The most experienced low-level pilot in the squadron had all the skill the job demanded and none of the distance it needed. The investigators also admitted something you rarely see stated so directly: that the actual sequence of what happened in those final seconds will never be fully known. Notice what that incident shares with everything before it. The spectators on the rim were exposed to the same hazard as the pilot. The debris did not care who was flying and who was watching. And once again, the killer was not really the heat. It was compression. Of distance, of altitude, of time. The valley narrows the space between a decision and its consequence until there is no space left. Heat compresses your judgment. Canyon walls compress your reaction time. It is the same trap wearing a different face. And there is one more thing this place compresses that nobody expects in the driest desert on the continent: water. Because when the exit finally fails here, it does not always fail because of heat. Sometimes it fails because of a flood. On August 5, 2022, 1 46/100ths of an inch of rain fell at Furnace Creek in about 3 hours. That does not sound like much until you remember this basin averages around 2 inches in an entire year. It got nearly a year's rain in a morning. The National Weather Service office in Las Vegas called it a 1,000-year event. The kind of rainfall with roughly a 1 in 1,000 chance of happening in any given year at that spot. And here, the geography turns on its head. The same bare rock that bakes the valley absorbs almost nothing. Rain does not soak in. It runs instantly off the slopes and into the low ground. And the low ground, the washes, the canyon bottoms, are exactly where the roads are. In this country, the washes are the roads. And a desert flash flood does not rise the way a river does, slowly, giving you time to move. It arrives as a moving front of water and mud and rock coming down a canyon that was bone dry minutes earlier, because there is no soil and no root system to slow it down. The rock sheds every drop straight downhill into the one low channel available. The channel is the road. The car is on the road. So the water did not flood alongside the roots out. It flooded the roots out. Every road in the park closed. About 60 vehicles were buried in mud and debris. Roughly 500 visitors and 500 staff were stranded, unable to drive out of a place that gets 2 inches of rain a year because of water. No injuries were reported, which is its own small miracle. But 1,000 people spent that day and longer unable to leave, dependent on whatever supplies were already inside the park, while crews cleared the buried roads foot by foot with heavy equipment, because a road under mud and boulders does not reopen by waiting. The water drained in hours. The imprisonment lasted far longer than the storm. Look at what it proves. 1,000 people were trapped by the exit problem, the exact same exit problem that caught the wagon party in the winter of 1849 and the German family in the summer of 1996, except this time the agent was flood instead of drought or heat. The trap does not need summer. It does not need a specific season: heat, cold, drought, flood. The valley has an exit failure for every one of them. The season only changes the weapon. which leaves the last question, the one the very first minute of this promise to answer. If the road can fail, what about the air? Why? At the exact moment a person needs a helicopter most, can the helicopter not come? Here is the physics, and it is beautiful and awful. A helicopter flies by, throwing air downward. Its rotor blades bite into the air and push it down, and the air pushes back, and that push is lift. Everything depends on there being enough air to grab. Now heat the air. Hot air expands, which means the molecules spread out, which means any given volume of it holds fewer molecules than cold air does. Pilots have a name for this: density altitude. When the air is blistering hot, a rotor spinning at the same speed at the same physical elevation behaves as though it were much higher up in thin mountain air, because there is genuinely less air there to push against. The blades claw and find less to hold. Lift falls off. Push it far enough, and there is not enough air left for the machine to safely carry a load, or sometimes to safely fly at all. That is why the Park Service line is not caution, but physics. Above roughly 120 degrees, the medevac helicopter is grounded. Think of the rotor as a hand trying to push off from water to shove a boat forward. In dense, cool air, the water is thick, and the hand gets a solid shove. In thin, superheated air, it is like trying to push off from a fistful of mist. The hand sweeps through and finds almost nothing to press against. The hotter it gets, the more someone on the ground needs to be lifted out, and the less able the machine is to lift anyone. So the rescuers built a workaround out of the geography itself, the same geography that causes the problem. When it is too hot to fly in the basin, the ground crews do not wait for the air to cooperate. Paramedics load the patient into an ambulance and drive up out of the deepest, hottest air, gaining elevation, because every 1,000 feet or so, the air cools by several degrees. They climb to as much as 3,000 feet, where it might be 5 to 10 degrees cooler and, crucially, where the air is dense enough to fly. Only there, at the meeting point they have driven to, can the helicopter finally come down, take the patient, and go. The rescue does not begin when the helicopter appears. It begins with a drive uphill against the clock, carrying a person whose body is failing, to a place high enough for a rotor to work. Walk through what that actually costs in time, because time is the entire game with heat illness. First, someone has to recognize what is happening, which is genuinely hard when the victim looks bone dry, may be confused, and is often insisting they are fine. Then the call has to go out across more than 3 million acres, and the nearest ground crew might be a long way off on roads that are slow. They reach the patient, stabilize what they can, and load them. And only then does the clock on the drive uphill even start. Every one of those steps is happening to a body whose core temperature is already climbing, in a place where the sky, normally the fastest way out, has been sealed shut by the very heat doing the damage. The helicopter is not late because anyone is slow or careless. It is late because the air itself refuses to carry it until the patient has been driven up to meet it. Go back now to that rider near Badwater on July 15, 2023, the one this all started with. That day, in that 128-degree air, the helicopter did not launch into the basin. The rider died. Others in the area were hit too. One person taken all the way to Las Vegas with severe heat illness. 4 more treated and released. That is what a real day at the top of the range does, not the mythical 134, a verified 128. And it happens again and again in the same shape. On July 20, 2024, a 42-year-old visitor from Belgium was walking on the Mesquite Flat sand dunes when the air was 123 degrees. He lost his flip-flops in the sand, a small thing, a stupid, ordinary thing, and had to keep going across ground that at 123-degree air is far hotter still underfoot. He suffered third-degree burns to his feet. He could not walk out. Other visitors carried him. And because the air was too hot and thin for a helicopter to reach him where he fell, He had to be taken by ambulance first, driven up and out until the temperature dropped to around 109 degrees, before a helicopter could finally take over. A man burned by the ground, unreachable from the sky, saved only by being carried and then driven to a place where the air was thick enough to fly. Now you can see the whole machine at once, every gear meshing. The four ranges wring the moisture out of the air and seal the basin. Geography sets the constraint. Dark, bare rock and cloudless sky drive the surface past 200 degrees, and the trapped air recycles its own heat until it recycles it into the 120s. Weather activates the constraint. That heat attacks the human body faster than the body can warn its owner, and it destroys judgment before it destroys the legs, so people walk when they should wait. The human element creates the exposure. Then the same heat that is killing the body reaches up and deletes the one machine that could carry the body out by thinning the very air the rotor needs. Distance and physics close off the rescue. Geography makes the heat. The heat thins the air. The thin air erases the helicopter. Each stage is the cause of the next. That is why the title holds. That is why rescue gets further away exactly when the heat peaks. It is not a coincidence, and it is not bad luck. It is a chain, and every link is physics, and people keep coming. Not despite the number, because of it. Stand at the Furnace Creek Visitor Center on a bad day in July and you will see it plainly. There is a large digital thermometer there, and when it climbs into the 120s, a crowd forms in front of it. People line up to be photographed beside the reading, grinning, because the number is the attraction. Behind them, their cars sit with the engines running and the doors hung open, air conditioning pouring uselessly out into 125-degree air. Cold breath swallowed instantly by the heat. A crowd gathering because of a number, on a day when, a few miles away and a few hundred feet down, no helicopter can fly.